Honourable Member for Ottawa South.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good morning to colleagues. I'd like to thank the member from Simcoe North for bringing forward this motion. It's an important motion. It's one that we will be supporting. It's a local issue that his community clearly cares about. He has kindly, the member from Simcoe North, shared with me support letters from marinas and other businesses and property owners in his riding. As he rightly points out, this is about almost $24 billion worth of property, 160 dams, 50,000 residences and property owners, and more. By way of background, for those who are not as familiar with Ontario as myself and the member, we're talking about the channel that links the Trent-Severn waterway to Georgian Bay. It's a winding, narrow passage chiseled from the rock floor of Georgian Bay, immediately south of Lock 45 in Port Severn, Ontario. It's a hazard for recreational vessels because it is, first of all, rock-faced. Secondly, it requires fairly sharp turns. Thirdly, it's not wide enough for larger vessels to pass each other, and finally, it suffers from unexpected swift currents from the release of water from the locks. The channel, Mr. Speaker, becomes even more difficult to navigate safely during low water level conditions on Georgian Bay, a condition that has now prevailed since 1999. The bay is currently 35 centimeters below its long-term average for this time of year. And the hazardous nature of the channel has deterred boaters from using it, resulting in lost business for services, marinas, our retail sector, food services, and more on Georgian Bay. As an environmental lawyer, I fully understand that water resources support Canada's social fabric. They underpin our biodiversity. They are central to our economic prosperity, Mr. Speaker. Now, while I support the motion, I also think that government has a responsibility to take action when environmental challenges pose threats to our environment and our economy. This is a perfect demonstration project or demonstration case of how we should be handling the realities that we're going to be facing over the next 50 to 100 years, Mr. Speaker. For the past 20 years, I've been calling for a detailed national climate change strategy for Canada. A strategy to both mitigate and help adapt to climate change. Just recently, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released some numbers. In fact, it was last weekend, showing that the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere is now well over 400 parts per million and holding. Why is that important? It's important because we're trying to maintain the projected temperature increases, Mr. Speaker, to 2 degrees Celsius going forward. If we continue to climb in the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it's going to be very difficult to contemplate holding that temperature increase to 2 degrees. Why is that so important? Well, that's important, Mr. Speaker, because we now know that the Great Lakes are in long-term decline because we've seen an ever-increasing temperature increase in them for a few reasons, mostly because of evaporation, because of temperature increases. We've also seen the effects of the dredging of the St. Clair River, and we've seen other effects of climate change right across Canadian society. Storms, flooding, the frequency and severity of these are going to continue. Now, if we had a national climate change strategy for Canada, Mr. Speaker, it would help address the low water levels, as I said, and help many waterways in Canada become safer, easier to navigate without having to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars apiece for dredging. Which makes it all the more difficult to understand why the Prime Minister last week, with the Prime Minister from Australia, once again positioned the economy and the environment in isolation from each other, saying that we can't afford to address the climate change challenge. Well, he could not be more wrong, Mr. Speaker. Last year, Lake Huron and Lake Michigan hit their lowest January water levels since record-keeping began in 1918, following more than a decade of below-normal rain and snowfall and higher temperatures that increase evaporation. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, at a time when we need more and better science, you would think you'd want to know for the 50,000 property owners along this waterway, you'd want to know what might be coming. At that very time, we find out that the Conservative government is cutting funding for environmental science. It has cut funding to the International Joint Commission, leading to Lana Polak, the U.S. co-chair of the IJC, commenting, quote, "We have always depended on good collaboration with agencies in both the governments, but when those agencies get cut, we feel it, the lakes feel it." Environment Canada's budget, Mr. Speaker, for the Conservative members who might want to listen on the other side, in the report on plans and priorities over the next 2 years, the government plans to decrease by 1/3. 30%, that's $300 million cut from $1 billion budget. 1/3. In 2014-15, again in the report on plans and priorities, climate change and clean air programs are being cut 70% between now and 2017. 70% between now and 2017. I would think the member in this important motion would want to work internally in his own caucus to remind the Prime Minister that we're going to have to help these property owners. We're going to have to help these companies in the private sector adjust to these new realities. Instead of embracing the economic opportunities that are inherent in the adaptation and mitigation that is to come, the government continues to divide the two. Divide the two. International climate change and clean air funding, Mr. Speaker, will be cut 45%. And staffing levels, get this, by 2017 are being cut by over 80%. That hardly sounds like a country getting ready to adjust to the realities of climate change and all of the economic opportunities that are inherent in addressing climate change going forward. We will continue to put pressure on the government, Mr. Speaker, to also drive forward on a national water resources strategy, a comprehensive water strategy, working with our provinces, our municipalities, our territories, and beyond, and when necessary, with the government of the United States. Our waterways are interconnected. Our land masses are connected. Our oceans are contiguous. We're going to have to work together. Finally, this is a wonderful opportunity, a wonderful case where, if the government had not eliminated the National Roundtable on the Environment and the Economy, the National Roundtable could have worked with the member, work with private businesses, work with Aboriginal groups, environmental NGOs, orders of government, to come together with a better, more comprehensive approach to dealing with this watershed management challenge, Mr. Speaker. It's unfortunate, but I think it's an important moment for the government to stop, drop the rhetoric, drop the partisanship, drop the ideology on climate change, and understand that we can, as one person once said, we did a lot of damage to the planet by running down its capital. Imagine how much more money we can make by actually replenishing it, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister